give it a full shlema to everybody that's in such dire needs at this time. Okay, my friends, we finished the main parsha, starting off talking about the sacrifices, but there is a second follow-up to more details that we haven't discussed. But Baruch Hashem, I think it's still been quite interesting, even though we're talking about sacrifices and stuff. Today, we're going to talk about the fire on the altar, and there's a number of interesting things. So join me, my friends, as we begin the second parsha in the third book of the Torah, Chumash Vayikra, Parshas Tzav. That's what it's called. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar. And Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, what does God say? The first word in the second verse of today's parsha, Tzaves Aaron, command Aaron. It doesn't usually say that. It usually says, say to Aaron, say to his sons. What's this word of command? When does God say the word command? When does Hashem use that terminology that's not often used, that he's telling you to command things? So Rashi says this word of tzav, command, is actually the correct understanding, description of it, is encouraging you to do it. It's an encouragement. It's alacrity. I think that's the word. I don't know if you know what that word means. Like giving you the alacrity means encouragement. Do it with energy and do it. And why specifically here does Hashem, or we're in the Torah, besides one place, I think, every place the Torah says tzav, it's for a unique reason. It's to encourage you to do it. Why? Why do we need a word of encouragement? And that is wherever there is a loss of money, financial loss, where it costs money, where you might lose money because of it, so you might not gain anything. Particularly certain sacrifices that might not be in the best interest of the Kohen. The burnt offering, they don't get such financial benefit. They can't eat. They only get the skins of the burnt offering. They only have the skins of the burnt offering, not any other than meat. So the Kohen might say, you come to the job, which part of the kitchen do you want? I want to get the place that's having the filet mignon, the Wagyu steak. That's what I want. I don't want the burnt offering, which all I get is the skin. So whenever there's a commandment in Torah, which it's financially lost, even other mitzvahs we do, I would say a good case of this is sending your kids to yeshiva. That's a very big expense. You really got to love God to pay for the yeshiva education. It's not a cheap thing. So Hashem says, tzav, when there's a loss, financial loss, he gives you that extra encouragement, that extra command. We're encouraging you. I don't know if commands, I guess it is, but it's more Rashi's describing it as an encouraging way for Hashem to really encourage you to do that mitzvah, even though there's financial loss. So the Kohen might not like this mitzvah so much, because why would I want to take part of the sacrifice that I'm not even going to get much meat out of it? Why should the other guy get the better kitchen? So Hashem is encouraging you. This is a mitzvah. Do it with alacrity and encouragement. Okay. So tzav, so God tells Moses, tzav es Aaron, command Aaron, Vesbanav and his children, command the Kohanim. Lamer saying, Zois Torah Ha'olah. This is the Torah law regarding the Olah, the burnt offering. These are the requirements, the burnt offering. If you remember last week, that's the first sacrifice we spoke about, right? This is a sacrifice that's completely given a gift to God. The skins go to the Kohen, but there's no pieces of the animal going on the altar. This is totally and completely being burnt. This is totally and completely being burnt on the altar. Now, a few additions to this burning. I just want to explain some stuff that Rashi adds here to this fire. So, because we're going to talk about this fire. So there was a fire, by the way, that came down from heaven. Hashem, that was a miracle. God made a fire come down from heaven. I believe we're going to learn this in next week's Torah portion. The Jews set up the temple, and to show that God's here, God sent the fire down. However, the Kohanim were commanded to be organized, to add wood to the fire. I think even to bring their own fire. So, and never to let, it's actually a pretty cool thing. That fire never went out. Even when they traveled in the desert, that fire didn't go out. Even when they traveled in the desert, the fire did not go out. So what was the fire done for? They would burn the burnt offering on the fire, right? So they would put the fats of certain animals in the fire. They would put the limbs of the animals. And that would burn all night. Do you think it would just burn in 1 minute, like it would burn up? No, it takes time. The thing had to really get burnt. The whole animal had to be burnt to God, completely burnt. So it actually, a whole night, they'd put it on the fire on the altar, would burn, like the matzah bakeries, like the pizza ovens, they never turn it off. I think they keep it on all night because it's not worth it to get the heat back up again. So on the altar, that fire would burn all night. Now, another interesting rule Rashi says he teaches us. What happens if, just an interesting rule about this fire on the altar, that if it was an animal that was messed up, the Kohen messed up, past its time, or they thought wrong thoughts in it, and they put that animal on the altar. Once it got up on there, don't take it down. Doesn't come down. Once it gets on the fire on the altar, you sit and you burn it. Unless it's an animal that was disqualified to begin with, you weren't even allowed to bring it. Remember, like we learned about that. Let's say an animal was used, God forbid, for bestiality. That's gross. That's disgusting. If that goes on the altar, take that off. That was disqualified to begin with. But if it's an animal that wasn't disqualified to begin with, just something bad, the Kohanim messed up, something happened in the kitchen, they got messed up. Once it's on there, do not take it off. So you leave it there, it sits there, and it burns, and it becomes ashes, and the whole thing gets burned through. So it burns the whole night, the verse says. A whole night. That's the main fire that burns all night. And you put the animal there, and it burns, and it burns, and it burns, and all the sacrifice that goes, they get burnt on in this large stage, this large altar there, until the morning. It sits and burns everything until the morning. And it's okay. It's okay if it doesn't burn right away. It's okay if it was a daily sacrifice. It's fine. As long as it's on there and it's burning, it could burn and burn and burn it, even if it's not fully burnt. You're going to see soon what happens if stuff still were not burnt by the morning. Put them back in again and make sure that they get burnt up. Another thing they would use for this fire, because we're talking about the fire on the altar, is ve'esha mizbeach tukad boy. They would also take fire from there, and they would bring it to the inner small altar, the golden altar that was inside the Mishkan itself, which they burnt the spices on. That was the spices altar. That stuff would get lit from the outer altar. So they took the fire that came down from heaven. They kept that fire going every single day, every single night, never put out. That was like the pilot fire that never went out. And they would add wood to it and take care of it. And then they would take from that fire and light the altar. And by the way, we're going to see soon also, where else would they use that fire from? They use that fire for the menorah. So the menorah would get lit for the fire on the altar, and the inner altar would get lit for the fire on the altar. That was the pilot. By the way, I just want to bring it up because it's connected to Pesach that's coming up. In Pesach, like Shabbos, we're not allowed to strike a match and create a new fire. But unlike Shabbos, we are allowed to light a fire from a pre-existing flame. So for example, when you light Shabbos candles, when you light holiday candles Saturday night and Sunday night, you're not allowed to strike a match to light the candles, the holiday candles that you're going to light Saturday night for the first day of Pesach and Sunday night for the second day of Pesach. You're not allowed to strike a new flame. You have to have a yard side candle, a 72-hour candle that lasts the whole 3 days. And then when you come to light your candles on Saturday night after Shabbos is over, you'll wait till Shabbos finishes, you'll go back to the flame. So the same thing is here. The altar was the burnt fire from heaven that never went out, that they lit everything from that. Okay, that's what the verse is telling us about. Verse 3. Okay, so what does he do? What clothes does he wear? He's got to put on the nice Kohen clothes. We know he puts on the white clothes. He puts on what we learned is called the kisoinas, the tunic. He had a white, not like the Kohen Gadol that had 8 beautiful clothes. He had a white robe, a tunic, a white robe. And by the way, here's actually an answer to, I think, Ira's question. He asked, or somebody asked, did they measure him? And the answer, Rashi says, yes, it has to fit the size of the kohen. So here you see clearly, actually, it calls it mido. Mido means the measurement. And Rashi tells us, actually, it's a commandment in the Torah here telling us that the clothes has to be tailor-made to fit the kohen. Someone asked this question, I think it was Ira. Yeah, was it you, Ira, asked me a while ago? So here's the answer to the question. It says here clearly in the Torah, mido. It doesn't call it ketonat, which is a normal word used for the robe. It means it has to be measured, which means it's tailor-made, nice, tight, tailor-made clothing to each kohen, to the person. So who wears tailor-made white tunic, his white robe, or a white shirt, you want to call it, a long white robe. And he puts on his white linen trousers, his pants. So he's wearing a long white robe and white pants under it, linen pants. And Rashi tells us here that he's not allowed to wear underwear under these things, I guess. There's not I think, as far as I understand, that is his underwear. There could be nothing separating the kohen's clothes from the kohen's body. He can't wear an extra undershirt, right? Even if he's cold, I guess. He's not allowed to, he has to only wear the clothes that that we tell him to wear. It has to be touching his skin. Part of the kohen is the clothing, very important. So the tailor-made long underwear or white linen pants, if you want to call them, and the robe on top cannot have any extra clothes. He can't put on stuff underneath, no socks or no stuff underneath it. What does he do? So the kohen puts on his kohen clothes. He goes all night. The fire's been burning. It's like a good fire. Okay, and he goes and he sticks his shovel into the good burnt innermost coals. When you have a fire, like the inside has a good serious ash, it was really, really burnt. He takes a shovel, he sticks it inside, takes from the deep inside coals. And from the section where he put the animal up yesterday, right? He put the burnt offering, it got really burnt well. The animal is completely burnt, its ashes. He sticks it into that area where the ashes of the ola, of the burnt offering went. He sticks the shovel in there. And he puts it, he goes and he gets a good burnt scoop of ashes from the burnt offering, and he goes down and he puts it next to the side of the mizbeach. So there was a pile right next to the mizbeach. Not a lot. The maximum it could have is a shovel full, but it had to have a minimum of 3 fingers full. It wasn't a lot. We just needed, part of the service was that some of the ash of the burnt offering is put next to it. Remember, we learned miraculously that ash would disappear into the ground. It would be a miracle. They would take some of the burnt offering, put it in the ground. They would also take some of the wicks, if you remember, and the ashes from the spices altar. They would put it on the floor. Miraculously, it would disappear. Now, there was a lot of ash left over. We'll see in a minute what would they do with the rest of the ash. But this little bit of ash that was really burnt well, they would put on the side. What happens if the kohen comes and he sees some limbs, just hanging out limbs left over that weren't burnt? He moves the ash into a pile and lets it sit and burn until everything is burnt through completely. So you got to have really burnt stuff. Some people like their food burnt. This is all the way burnt. Nothing should be left. It has to be completely burnt. Okay. Then what does he do next? He takes off his clothes. We'll see the next verse, number 4. Why does he take off his clothes? And Rashi says, the next job is a dirty job. Here you were serving in the temple. But what you're about to do, he's about to take the ash and bring it all the way outside where the Jewish people live. This is like more of a garbage man kind of job. And he says, you don't wear the same clothes. When you're in the kitchen, you get all dirty. The guy serving the president doesn't wear the same clothes that he's in the kitchen with. His clothes he wears a bib or whatever it's called, an apron, get all dirty. And when you come to serve the president, you put on nice fancy clothes and you serve him. So the same thing is here. When you were serving in the temple, you wear your nice Kohen fancy clothes, the white linen clothing. But now you're going out of Pashtas, but God to take off those clothes that you were wearing. You shouldn't be wearing that clothes anymore for the next job. And put on cheap clothes, right? Other clothes that could get dirty, you don't mind. Cheaper clothes than the high-end linen clothes they wore in the temple. And then take that. All the rest is a ton of ashes. It says it looked like an apple. Could you imagine, from all the sacrifices and the fats and everything that was burnt there wasn't just a little shovel full of ash that was put on the side. All you do with all the rest of the ashes, take all the rest of the ashes and bring it outside the Jewish people. Remember, I told you the other day, there was a cemetery area which everything impure went, leprosy bricks and cemeteries. That was out. Of course, you don't build that in the center of town. You build that outside the city for impure. And they also had an outside the city where they would put pure stuff, only for pure stuff. And they made a special place where they kept outside the Jewish people lived in the desert or outside Jerusalem. They had a special place where they brought all these ashes that filled up the altar. Again, don't wear your Kohen clothes for this. Wear your cheaper clothes to take that out. Put on your jeans, whatever you wore for that. And take that outside the camp, makim tar, but keep it in a pure place. You're not just going to dump it in the garbage can, God forbid. You're going to put it and keep it in another place. Okay, verse 5. Moving right along. So that's a little bit about the fire. Never should go out this fire, which means I believe this fire stayed on for hundreds of years. Light the fire. Oh, actually, he's saying something else. I'm sorry. Light, which is the previous factor said is true, but he's saying now light the menorah, I believe. He's saying to goodbye, loy sichba. No, that is what he's saying. I'm sorry. The altar fire should never go out. You got to keep that fire going. Keep the wood on it, make sure it's lit, and keep the fire going. Every morning, the kohen's got to do a little bit of woodwork. He should bring, there was a room there in the temple where they had wood. They make sure there were no worms. It was high quality wood. Every morning he would go, every single morning go, put wood on the altar, and he would throw every day the burnt offering on it, Victor and he would put the fats of the shlamim sacrifices on it every single day. He would put on the wood on the fire to make sure the fire was lit. Now you can ask me a question, maybe, how many fires were there on the altar? And the answer is there's a debate. There's a debate exactly how many fires there were on the altar. Some people say there was 2, some people say there was 3, and some people say there was 4. They imagine there's an opinion that says that the altar had 4. It wasn't just one big fire. They had a nice wood pile here. It's a large altar, and then another pile to the side. Another guy says no, they had 2 piles of wood. Some people said there was 3 piles. Some people said it was 4 different piles of wood. And Yom Kippur, everybody agrees that they added another one. So either it was 2 a whole year and then an extra one in Yom Kippur, or 3 a whole year and extra one in Kippur, 4 a whole year and extra one in Kippur, whatever. There's a debate how to understand this verse and understand what's the correct amount of fires to have on the altar used for different things throughout the year. Rashi doesn't go into exactly what the fires were used for, but Rashi says you should know that based on this verse, because it keeps on saying the word al moikta a lot of times, it's telling you there was more than one fire. How many fires there were there? Like you have an oven, you have a stovetop. There's burners. How many burners were there? But there were fires that kept the fire going, but there were different fires on the altar. There's a debate here exactly how many fires there were. Okay. Now, he also tells us, Rashi tells us from this verse, we learned something else. When the stuff that are burnt on the altar always start and end with the same sacrifice. Anything you're adding has to go in between them. So there was the morning daily sacrifice that we daven Shacharis. And then there's the mincha, the afternoon daily sacrifice. That would be the first sacrifice brought in the morning, and you'd close the day with that sacrifice. Any other sacrifice you wanted to bring, sin offering or peace offering, a guilt offering, everything had to go in between the middle. You always started the day with the daily burnt offering and ended the day with the daily burnt offering. Okay, continuing right along, verse 6. The menorah, that's Eish Tamid, Tukad. Always light the menorah. We're telling you now from this altar fire that came down from heaven that was kept there by the Kohanim. The menorah every day would be lit from this fire. God forbid, do not let the fire go out. There's 2 violations. Keep the fire burning. Never let the fire go out. We're almost done. Verse 7. And this is the Torah of the mincha offering. Going to move on to the flour. Remember the meal offering that we have. What about the flour offering? For some reason, he jumps to that, and he's telling you, always hakir v'yisa b'nei Aaron l'fnei Hashem al pnei hamizbeach. Just totally different topic. Just 3 more. What do you have? 3 more verses left here. No, a few more verses left actually. The meal offering, the flour offering that you would bring. Always bring. What do you do with the flour? Where does that go? So you bring that on the altar. Okay. Look what verse 7 says. The children of Aaron should bring it l'fnei Hashem before God. Al pnei hamizbeach to the front of the altar. So basically, the front of the altar, meaning there was a ramp. As soon as you climb up the ramp, that would be the front of the altar. That means it was on the south side of the ramp of the altar, because that's where the ramp met the altar on the south side. And also, not just on the south side, we also wanted to be on the west side, because the west side of the altar was facing the doorway to enter the tabernacle. So it was in the southwest corner. What would you do with the flour offering? The guy would bring, a basket of flour, and the kohen would scoop out a fistful and put it on the altar to burn. Where would that go on the altar? That would go on the southwest corner, like Southwest Airlines. It would go in the southwest corner of the altar on the mizbeach is where it would go. The kohen, as we learned before, would scoop out a scoop from it. He would get a good juicy piece of a scoop, because remember there was oil on the flour, a lot of oil. He would take the juiciest, the most oily part with the flour and do a fistful and grab a fistful on it and put it on the altar to burn on the southwest corner on the altar. There was frankincense, a kind of spices on the corner. He wouldn't scoop that out, but then after he did the scoop of the oily and flour together, the most oily part of the flour, he would then scoop out all the spices and he would put it on the altar. I believe it also had salt, and they would burn that in the southwest corner of the mizbeach. And then it would be a burnt offering for Hashem. The rest of the flour would go to the Kohanim. The Kohanim would enjoy the rest of the flour, make some good baguettes or something out of it. Actually, what Rashi tells us, it's not allowed to be chametz though. Even not just the flour that goes in the altar can be chametz. Even the after eating that the Kohanim eat cannot be chametz. And however, if it was a Kohen that sinned and he brought the sin offering of flour, then the Kohanim would not be allowed to eat it. At that point, it would be burnt. Only if it was a non-Kohen that sinned, then the Kohen would make forgiveness for the guy that sinned by eating it. But if it was a Kohen that sinned, then the Kohanim wouldn't eat it. Okay. Verse 9. Verse 9, we did already 8. Verse 9, Vanaisaris Mimenu, the leftovers from it, Yachlorak Aaron of the Aaron and the sons will eat all the rest of our flour, because remember, he brought 2.5 liters of flour, and then 8 or 9 or 11 ounces of oil. So he only scooped that one scoop. The rest of it goes to the Aaron and his sons. They get to eat it, make matzah out of it. And they could only eat it in a holy place. We could only eat it, have to have their barbecue, whatever they're eating, or their flour that they're eating here in the courtyard of the temple. So imagine, I guess you had a lot of Kohanim, you had maybe a big lunchroom on the Temple Mount in the courtyard where the Kohanim, it was so holy, the Kohanim would eat it for you. They were not allowed to eat it anywhere in even Jerusalem. They had to only eat it in the temple courtyard. So they must have had like tables or stuff there, I don't know, wherever the Kohanim would eat the food that they meant to eat to forgive for the person that sinned. Leisiyafa chametz. Do not make a chametz. Even the portion, not just that goes on the altar, can't be chametz. Even what the Kohanim eat cannot be chametz. Chalkam nasati oisem mishe. This is a holy portion that I gave them. My portion, God's saying, kodesh kadashim, and it has to be treated as holy of holies, kechatos v'cha'asham, like the two sin offerings, the sin offering and the guilt offering. And I'm going to explain what that means. So there is there's something called holy of holies, and there's something just called regular holy. What's the difference if something is holy of holies or something is just regular holy? If it's holy of holy sacrifice, which is like a sin offering, it has to be eaten by the Kohanim in the courtyard. Cannot leave the Temple Mount, cannot leave the courtyard. They have to eat all that. They can't take it home and have a barbecue in their backyard. Say, I brought home a nice piece of steak in Jerusalem somewhere and eat it. They have to eat it there. If it's regular holies, no problem. They could own real estate, a house somewhere in Jerusalem, take it home to their backyard as long as it's pure. There's nothing unholy there, and have their steak with their family and their back. I think with the other Kohanim, at least men for sure, could eat it over there. But here, it would have to be eaten in the courtyard. So they must have had some kind of lunch space or somewhere where they would eat, dinner space where all the Kohanim would eat this stuff. Now, I believe it was any male Kohen could eat it, or I'm not sure about the rest of the family. Now I have to find out about that. But they could even be blemished. When I say blemished, meaning that a Kohen's not allowed to serve who has a defect, who has a physical defect, out of honor and respect for the temple. He couldn't, not just could the animal not have a defect, of the person serving it. It's not, you're not going to put in the royal queen's palace soldiers who are missing a foot or something. You're going to have a certain level of respect, of royalty. The Kohen cannot have a defect, but to eat, can't serve, but the Kohen could eat, even if he has a defect, a physical defect, he is still allowed to eat the meat. Okay. Now, he says it's like a sin offering and like a guilt offering. What's the difference if it's a sin offering and a guilt offering? Some of them are like sin offerings, meaning that if I have the wrong thought that it's for a sin, it's no good. But there is a guilt offering, which is if you have the wrong thought on it, it's still kosher, even if you have the wrong intention when you do the sacrifice. Some things, a carbon toid, I'm not getting to all the details. A Thanksgiving offering is okay. That flour offering is okay if you have the wrong thought, but a sin offering, flour offering, you can't have a wrong thought. So without getting to the details over here, some sacrifices, if you messed up on the thought process, are no good. Some are still good. Verse 11, I think this is the last verse. Yeah, Kol Zachar b'vnei Aaron, all male Kohanim, even the one that's blemished that can't serve. Yechlenu is the ones that could eat the holy of holy meal offerings. Chak olam l'deresechem, it's an everlasting statute. Misha Hashem from the fire of Hashem kol hashiga by mikdash, and they have to be eaten at the level of holiness, and if they touch anything, the thing becomes holy like them, which means, let's say you had two sacrifices next to each other. One was Holy of Holies, which had more requirements than just the regular holy. And some of the Holy of Holies got mixed in and went together with the regular holy. That holy will now take on the status of the Holy of Holies and will have the same obligations as him and has to be treated in the same manner. And that, my friends, is the end of today's Chumash. Any questions or comments on today's Chumash? And then I'm going to go. I have a Bas Mitzvah to go to right after. Yes. Go ahead, Ira. Yes. Please, Ira. Go ahead. Now we can't see you. Now we could see you. And I'm going. I'm just taking a question.
Okay. Hey. Hello? Okay, sorry about that. Quick question. So the flame was in the temple and it had to remain lit all the time, correct?
Correct.
So what happened? after the destruction of the first temple, and then you have the second temple, the destruction of the second temple. What they did? What?
It went out. You're right. That's one of the things that was very sad.
So they relit
I
it?
want to find out, even when they traveled in the desert, they put a metal pan over it, and the fire stayed under that metal pan, I believe. So
I'm just curious. So, in the temple, after the first temple went out, and then they did the second temple, they had to have the flame there. So what?
correct. So they might have lit it on their own. I don't know. I don't think Hashem sent the second flame down from heaven, but they lit it on their own and they kept it going. Correct.
Okay, just curious.
You're right. One of the very sad things was that they didn't. One of the sad things which we mourn is the first time that they didn't bring the daily offering. So, in other words, they did it every single day for hundreds of years, and then when they besieged Jerusalem, they didn't let any animals in. They were starving. There was no food left. That was one of the saddest things, and that's what allowed the temple to then get destroyed, because they weren't having the sacrifices anymore. Hashem didn't want them to bring the sacrifices anymore, and so that was a huge occasion when the sacrifice stopped being brought. That was like a major event. Correct. So every single day they brought it until they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, and one of the things they did was they stopped bringing the daily sacrifice on the thing. So the fire was probably the same thing. I don't know. I wonder where the first time the fire went out, but that's pretty amazing. If the fire came out from heaven and they kept that fire going, that must have been very special until the first time when the fire was put out, when they couldn't leave it lighted anymore, right? When the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, that obviously happened. Yeah. All right. Very interesting. And by the way, that's what we have in the shul, the Ner Tamid, right? Why do you think in the shul they have the light there? It's representing the menorah, but it's also because the shul is supposed to represent the Beis HaMikdash. That's representing this fire that we learned about today, I think.
One last quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Wait, the speaker, is she going to be on Zoom or is it in person also?
On Zoom. She only does on Zoom now.
All right, great. Okay, thanks.
Take care, everyone. All the best.